What if Kevin Costner refused to do the accent everyone hated? What if Alan Rickman improvised his most iconic lines? Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves wasn't just arrows and adventure. It was a production war hiding feuds, last-minute casting disasters, and secrets that nearly destroyed the biggest medieval epic of the 90s.
Director Kevin Reynolds has worked with Costner in the past in Fandango, his first major leading role.
Number 20. Kevin Costner was fired twice during production and rehired. Both times, director Kevin Reynolds fired Kevin Costner twice during the 6-month shoot in England, and Costner quit 3 additional times over creative disputes. The production was so volatile that Warner Brothers kept replacement actors on standby throughout filming. Here's the first firing. 3 weeks into production, Reynolds fired Costner after he refused to perform a stunt sequence the way it was written, demanding script changes on set. Warner Brothers executives flew to England immediately and reinstated Costner within 18 hours because they had already spent $12 million. The second firing came during month 4 when Costner and Reynolds had a screaming match about the film's tone that crew members described as genuinely frightening. But here's the power struggle. Costner had just won Best Director and Best Picture Oscars for Dances with Wolves months before filming began. His star power exceeded Reynolds' directorial authority. Warner Brothers sided with Costner every time because losing him meant losing their investment. Here's the compromise that barely worked. The studio assigned a mediator to be on set daily, literally standing between Costner and Reynolds during disagreements. This person had no creative role except preventing the star and director from destroying each other. By the time filming wrapped, Costner and Reynolds weren't speaking. Reynolds requested his name be removed from the credits. Number 19. Alan Rickman's Sheriff of Nottingham wasn't supposed to be in the film.
Why a spoon, cousin?
Here's the casting accident that saved the entire movie. The Sheriff of Nottingham wasn't a major character in the original script, and was only supposed to appear in 3 brief scenes. The main villain was supposed to be Guy of Gisborne, played by Michael Wincott. But 3 weeks before filming, Warner Brothers executives watched early rehearsal footage and panicked. They felt the villain wasn't compelling enough to carry a 2-hour-plus epic. Here's the desperate solution. The studio hired script doctors to massively expand the sheriff's role, transforming him from minor antagonist to primary villain. This required completely rewriting the second and third acts in 10 days. But finding an actor willing to take a rushed rewrite was nearly impossible. 17 actors turned down the role. Here's why Alan Rickman said yes. He'd just finished Die Hard and was struggling with being typecast as a villain. His agent convinced him that playing a medieval villain would be different enough from Hans Gruber to show range. Rickman agreed, but demanded complete, creative freedom to play the character however he wanted. Warner Brothers, desperate and out of options, agreed. Here's the genius decision Rickman made. He decided to play the sheriff as a comedic psychopath, chewing scenery and improvising outrageous dialogue. The studio was horrified by his performance during filming, believing he was ruining the film's serious tone. Test audiences loved him so much that Warner Brothers expanded his role even further during editing. Number 18. Kevin Costner refused to do a British accent.
Okay, let's go. So we head out into this field.
Despite everyone begging him, what if the film's most criticized aspect was completely intentional? Kevin Costner deliberately refused to attempt a British accent, despite Warner Brothers hiring dialect coaches, despite other American actors in the cast doing accents, and despite director Kevin Reynolds pleading with him. Here's Costner's reasoning. He argued that American audiences would find a British accent pretentious and distancing. He believed Robin Hood needed to sound accessible to Middle America. Warner Brothers executives thought this was insane and demanded he at least try the accent. But here's the contract clause that gave Costner absolute power. His deal included creative approval over his own performance, meaning the studio literally couldn't force him to do an accent. They could only beg. Here's the compromise attempt. Dialect coach Joan Washington worked with Costner for 6 weeks before filming. developing a mid-Atlantic accent that would sound neither fully American nor British. Costner tried it for exactly 1 day of filming, hated how it sounded, and abandoned it permanently. Reynolds later revealed he shot several scenes twice, once with Costner attempting the accent and once without, hoping to convince him in editing. It didn't work, but here's the twist. Despite critics savaging Costner's American accent, the film earned nearly $400 million worldwide. Post-release surveys showed American audiences actually preferred his familiar voice. The decision everyone in Hollywood thought would destroy the film had zero negative impact on its commercial success. Number 17. Morgan Freeman's character, Azim, was added, specifically for diversity.
Probably get forward about half step. Step forward about half step if you can.
Here's the corporate decision that accidentally created an iconic character. Azim the Moor wasn't in any previous Robin Hood adaptation and wasn't in the original Prince of Thieves script. Warner Brothers executives mandated that a major black character be added to the film after research showed minority audiences weren't interested in medieval European stories. Here's the cynical calculation. Studio marketing believed a prominent black actor would increase box office from minority demographics by 15 to 20%. They instructed writers to create a character specifically for this purpose, giving them 2 weeks to develop Azim and integrate him into the existing script. But here's where corporate cynicism transformed into genuine art. Morgan. Freeman read the hastily written character and saw potential beyond tokenism. He demanded extensive script revisions to make Azim intelligent, capable, and essential to Robin's success rather than a sidekick. Freeman personally rewrote much of his dialogue, adding Islamic philosophy and cultural details the original writers knew nothing about. Here's the collaboration that elevated everything. Freeman and Costner developed genuine chemistry, improvising scenes that made their friendship feel authentic. The telescope sequence where Azim shows Robin the stars wasn't scripted. Freeman brought an actual period-accurate astrolabe to set and taught Costner about Islamic contributions to astronomy. That impromptu education became one of the film's most memorable scenes. What began as calculated diversity casting became the film's emotional core and one of cinema's great interracial friendships. Number 16. Christian Slater was cast 4 days before filming his first scene. What if a major character was cast in the middle of production? Christian Slater wasn't involved in Robin Hood until week 8 of filming, when the actor originally cast as Will Scarlet, Kiefer Sutherland, quit after violent disagreements with Kevin Reynolds. Sutherland had filmed 3 weeks of material before walking off set, following a dispute about his character's motivation. Here's the panic that followed. Warner Brothers needed a replacement immediately because Will Scarlet appeared in 37 scenes throughout the film. Reshooting everything with a new actor would cost millions and delay the release. The studio called every young actor in Hollywood. Most were committed to other projects or refused to join a troubled production mid-filming. Slater was working on another film in Los Angeles when his agent called with the offer. Here's the insane timeline. Slater flew to England on a Monday, had costume fittings Tuesday, 1 day of rehearsal Wednesday, and filmed his first scene Thursday. He learned his lines on the flight over, but here's the creative problem nobody anticipated. Sutherland had played Will as a brooding loner. Slater decided to completely reinvent the character as an angry, rebellious punk. This meant all of Sutherland's footage was unusable because the character was now completely different. Warner Brothers had to absorb the loss of 3 weeks of filming. Here's the cost. Replacing Sutherland with Slater added approximately $2.7 million to the budget. But Slater's intense performance created the film's most dramatic reveal when Will is exposed as Robin's illegitimate half-brother. Number 15. The Sherwood Forest. Scenes were filmed in 3 different countries. What if Sherwood Forest was actually 3 forests on 2 continents? The production filmed forest scenes in England's Burnham Beaches, France's Fontainebleau Forest, and North Carolina's Uwharrie National Forest, then edited them together to appear as a single location. Here's why this geographic chaos happened. The production originally planned to film everything in England near the actual Sherwood Forest in Nottinghamshire, but that forest had been largely destroyed over centuries and no longer looked like the dense woodland of legend. Scouts found Burnham Beaches, but it lacked the massive old growth trees the script required. Here's the solution that created continuity nightmares. The production filmed wide establishing shots in France where ancient forests still existed, close-up dialogue scenes in England for convenience, and complex action sequences in North Carolina, where insurance regulations were less restrictive than Europe. This meant Robin's camp existed in 3 countries simultaneously. But here's the detail fans caught. The trees change species between shots in the same scene. French oak trees in the wide shot become North Carolina pines in close-ups. Editors did their best to hide the switches, but careful viewers noticed vegetation changing instantly. Here's the cost of this deception. Transporting crew and equipment between 3 countries for forest scenes added approximately $4.3 million to the budget. The production built the same forest camp set 3 separate times in 3 countries, essentially tripling construction costs for those sequences. Number 14. The film's original ending. Had Robin Hood die and was changed after test screenings. Here's the ending that test audiences violently rejected. Director Kevin Reynolds' original cut had Robin Hood killed by the Sheriff of Nottingham during the final battle, dying in Marion's arms while Will Scarlet took over leadership of the Merry Men. This tragic conclusion was supposed to show that legends are bigger than individuals. Test audiences hated it with unprecedented passion. Here's the specific feedback. Warner Brothers conducted 4 test screenings in different cities. All 4 audiences rated the death ending as completely unacceptable. Comments included, "You can't kill Robin Hood," and "This ruins everything." Audience scores were 47% lower for the death ending compared to a survival ending. But here's the problem Reynolds faced. The death ending was already filmed, edited, and scored. Creating a survival ending required extensive reshoots during a period when the production was already over budget and behind schedule. Warner Bros. Demanded the change regardless of cost. Here's the rush solution. The production had 10 days to write, film, and edit a new ending where Robin survives. They brought back the entire cast for a week of additional shooting. Kevin Costner was filming another project and could only spare 3 days, forcing editors to reuse footage from earlier scenes combined with new material. The final wedding scene was shot in 2 days with minimal rehearsal. Here's the cost. The ending reshoot added $1.9 million to the already bloated budget, but post-release. Surveys confirmed test audiences were right. The survival ending tested 38% higher with paying audiences. Number 13. Alan Rickman improvised "I'll cut your heart out with a spoon" and most of his best lines.
Hurt the public, and they love him for it. Cancel the kitchen scraps for leopard.
What if the film's most memorable dialogue wasn't written by screenwriters? Alan Rickman improvised approximately 60% of the sheriff's dialogue, including virtually all the lines that became famous quotes. The "I'll cut your heart out with a spoon" threat, completely improvised. "Because it's dull, you twit, it'll hurt more," made up on set. "Cancel the kitchen scraps for lepers and orphans," pure Rickman invention. Here's how this happened. Rickman found the scripted sheriff dialogue boring and one-dimensional. He asked director Kevin Reynolds for permission to improvise, and Reynolds, desperate for anything that would improve the villain, agreed. But here's the technique Rickman developed. He would arrive on set each day with handwritten notes containing alternative dialogue options based on the scene's emotional beats. During takes, he would switch between scripted lines and his improvisations, giving editors multiple choices. Here's the creative chaos this created. Other actors never knew which version of the sheriff they'd get in any particular take. Michael Wincott later revealed he stopped trying to memorize his own lines precisely and instead focused on reacting authentically to whatever insanity Rickman delivered. But here's the vindication. When the film was released, critics who otherwise panned the movie consistently praised Rickman's performance. Multiple reviews specifically quoted his improvised lines. Warner Brothers later acknowledged that Rickman's improvisations saved the film from being completely forgettable. The studio gave him bonuses totaling $400,000 for dialogue contributions that weren't contractually required. Number 12. Bryan Adams' Everything I Do was rejected by the film's music department 3 times.
It was good to see you again, Mary.
It was good to be seen.
Here's the song that wasn't wanted. Composer Michael Kamen and lyricist Bryan Adams wrote, "Everything I Do It for You," specifically for Robin Hood, but the film's music supervisors rejected it 3 times as too soft and not epic enough for a medieval action film. Warner Brothers wanted a bombastic orchestral theme, not a power ballad. Here's the battle that followed. Adams and producer Mutt Lange believed the song was perfect, but couldn't convince the studio. After the 3rd rejection, they recorded a demo at their own expense and played it for director Kevin Reynolds without studio permission. Reynolds loved it and demanded it be included. Warner Brothers still resisted, arguing the song was wrong for the film's tone. Here's the compromise. The studio agreed to use the song over the end credits only, not in the actual film. Adams and Lange accepted this limitation. But here's where test screenings changed everything. Audiences in early screenings specifically mentioned loving the end credits song and wanting to hear it during the movie. Warner Brothers commissioned a second survey specifically about the song. Results showed 83% of viewers wanted it integrated into the film itself. Here's the rushed editing. The studio had editors insert the song into a romantic montage that was originally scored with traditional orchestral music. The new version tested significantly higher. Everything I Do was released as a single and spent 16 weeks at #1 worldwide, selling over 15 million copies and becoming one of the best-selling singles in history. The song the studio rejected 3 times earned more money than the film itself. Number 11. The entire Nottingham Castle was a full-scale practical set that cost $14 million. What if a single set cost more than some entire movies? Warner Brothers built a complete full-scale Nottingham Castle at Shepperton Studios in England, rather than using miniatures or matte paintings. The structure stood 8 stories tall, covered 3 acres, and cost $14 million to construct. This was the most expensive single set ever built for a film at that time. Here's the insane construction timeline. Over 400 construction workers labored for 6 months to build the castle before filming could begin. The production used 17,000 tons of steel, concrete, and timber. Every stone was hand-carved from polyurethane to look authentic on camera. The castle included working drawbridges, functional water systems, and internal chambers that went 3 stories underground. But here's the detail that made it necessary. Director Kevin Reynolds refused to use miniatures, demanding that every shot of Nottingham Castle show the real structure to maintain visual consistency. This meant building it large enough to photograph from any angle without revealing it was a set. Here's the cost that horrified Warner Brothers. The castle budget exceeded the entire planned budget for locations and sets combined. Executives demanded Reynolds scale back. He threatened to quit, arguing the castle was essential to the film's epic scope. Warner Brothers reluctantly approved the expense. Here's the aftermath. After filming wrapped, the studio tried to sell the castle to theme parks or other productions. Nobody wanted it. The castle was demolished in 1993, meaning $14 million was literally destroyed. That single set cost more than the total budget of many successful films that year. Number 10. Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, nearly drowned during the waterfall scene. Here's the near-death incident that was covered up for years. The romantic waterfall scene, where Robin watches Marion bathing, almost killed Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio when underwater currents trapped her beneath the surface for over 40 seconds. The production was filming at a real waterfall in Dorset, England, and safety coordinators had assured everyone the water was calm. They were wrong. Here's what happened. Mastrantonio was supposed to swim to a rock and climb out gracefully. On take 3, she dove underwater and immediately got caught in a circular current that pulled her under. She tried to surface, but the current kept dragging her back down. Crew members on shore didn't immediately realize she was in trouble because the waterfall spray obscured visibility. By the time someone noticed she hadn't surfaced, nearly a minute had passed. Here's the rescue that barely succeeded. A stunt coordinator dove in fully clothed and pulled Mastrantonio to shore. She was unconscious and required CPR on the riverbank. Paramedics revived her after approximately 90 seconds. She was hospitalized overnight for observation. Warner Brothers paid her $300,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement about the incident. Here's the production decision that shocked everyone. Director Kevin Reynolds wanted to reshoot the scene the next day. Mastrantonio refused to ever enter that water again. The production had to use a body double for remaining waterfall shots. Mastrantonio later revealed she still has nightmares about drowning and refuses to film any scenes involving submersion. Number 9. Kevin Costner demanded his brother be hired as his stunt double. Despite what if nepotism nearly killed the film's star? Kevin Costner insisted that his younger brother Dan Costner be hired as his primary stunt double, despite Dan having zero professional stunt experience. Warner Brothers initially refused, but Costner threatened to walk off the production unless his brother was hired. The studio caved because losing Costner meant losing their $200 million investment. Here's the disaster this created. Professional stunt coordinators had to spend 3 weeks training Dan Costner in basic stunt techniques that experienced performers already knew. During this training period, principal photography was delayed, costing approximately $400,000 in lost shooting days. But here's where inexperience became dangerous. During the castle siege sequence, Dan Costner was supposed to fall from a 12-foot wall onto padded mats. He mistimed the fall, missed the mats, and broke his collarbone on the stone floor. Filming shut down for 5 days while Warner Brothers flew in a professional stunt double from Los Angeles. Here's the financial cost. Dan Costner's injury and the delays it caused added over $900,000 to the budget. Insurance companies investigating the incident discovered that Dan had lied on his stunt certification forms and wasn't legally qualified to perform. Warner Brothers faced potential fraud charges for using an unqualified stunt performer. The studio settled with insurers for an undisclosed amount. Kevin Costner never publicly acknowledged that his nepotism nearly killed his brother and cost the production millions. Number 8. The film's original 3-hour cut was reduced to 2 hours and 23 minutes against the director's wishes. Here's the editing war that destroyed the director's vision. Kevin Reynolds delivered a 3-hour and 14-minute director's cut that Warner Brothers executives called absolutely unreleasable. The studio demanded 51 minutes be removed to create a more commercial runtime under 2.5 hours. Reynolds refused, arguing the cuts would destroy character development and narrative coherence. Here's the hostile takeover. Warner Brothers removed Reynolds from the editing room and hired independent editors to cut the film without his input. Reynolds sued the studio for breach of contract, arguing his deal included final cut approval. Warner Brothers lawyers found a loophole. Final cut approval only applied if the film came in under budget. Since the production exceeded budget by $47 million, Reynolds had forfeited creative control. Here's what was cut: an entire subplot about Marion's political maneuvering at court, totaling 23 minutes. Extended Merry Men character development scenes. A longer finale showing the aftermath of Nottingham's defeat. Multiple Alan Rickman monologues. Here's Reynolds' revenge. He gave interviews savaging Warner Brothers for butchering his film and publicly stated, "The theatrical version is not my movie." The studio responded by reducing his profit participation as punishment for criticizing them publicly. But here's the vindication. When Warner Bros. Released an extended director's cut on DVD in 2003, critics and fans agreed it was superior to the theatrical version. The studio had cut the wrong 51 minutes. Number 7. Sean Connery's cameo was filmed in 2 hours for $1 million. What if the film's most memorable moment was a last-minute addition? Sean Connery's appearance as King Richard wasn't in the original script and was conceived only 3 weeks before the film's release date. Warner Brothers executives watching the final cut realized the ending felt abrupt and needed a dramatic punctuation mark. They called Connery, who had played Robin Hood in 1976's Robin and Marion, and offered him $1 million for a single day of work. Here's the insane timeline. Connery agreed, but was only available for one specific day due to his shooting schedule for another film. The production had 6 hours to write the scene, create the costume, and rehearse before Connery arrived. Screenwriter Penn Densham wrote King Richard's dialogue in 45 minutes on a legal pad. Costume designer John Bloomfield had to create royal medieval armor overnight, using existing pieces modified to fit Connery. Here's the actual filming. Connery arrived at Shepperton Studios at 9 a.m., went through makeup and costume for 90 minutes, rehearsed for 30 minutes, and filmed for exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes before leaving to catch a flight. He did the entire scene in 4 takes. The production spent $1 million for 2 hours and 17 minutes of filming time, making it the most expensive per minute sequence in the entire film. But here's the impact. Test audiences who saw the version with Connery rated the ending 41% higher than those who saw it without. That 2-hour cameo earned its $1 million price tag by significantly improving audience satisfaction with the finale. Number 6. The Seal Moore bagpipe scene used authentic medieval instruments worth over $2 million. Here's the musical authenticity that nearly bankrupted the production. The funeral scene, featuring traditional Scottish bagpipes, used actual medieval instruments on loan from museums and private collectors. These weren't modern bagpipes made to look old. They were genuine 13th and 14th century instruments worth over $2 million combined and insured for even more. Here's why director Kevin Reynolds insisted on authenticity. He wanted the sound to be genuinely medieval rather than modern bagpipes that audiences might recognize from contemporary performances. Medieval bagpipes had different tonal qualities and construction that created a more haunting, mournful sound. But here's the problem with using priceless artifacts. Insurance companies required 24-hour armed security for the instruments. 3 armed guards were employed solely to watch the bagpipes during the entire filming period. The production couldn't transport them in normal vehicles. They required armored transport with GPS tracking. Here's the cost breakdown. Instrument rental fees were $37,000. Security costs were $112,000. Insurance premiums were $93,000. Transportation was $26,000. The total cost to use authentic medieval bagpipes for one 3-minute scene was $268,000. But here's the additional complication. The instruments were so fragile that only 2 people in the United Kingdom were qualified to play them. The production had to hire these specialists at $5,000 per day each. One of the players damaged a 13th century drone pipe during filming. The repair cost $62,000 and created an international incident with the Scottish Museum that owned it. Number 5. Morgan Freeman's telescope scene contains a historically accurate scientific lesson. What if one scene accidentally educated millions about medieval Islamic science? The sequence where Azim shows Robin the stars through a telescope contains genuinely accurate information about Islamic contributions to astronomy that most Western audiences had never learned. Morgan Freeman researched medieval Islamic astronomy for weeks and insisted the scene be historically accurate rather than fantasy. Here's the detail most viewers missed. Azim's dialogue about Islamic scholars preserving Greek astronomical knowledge during Europe's Dark Ages is completely factual. Muslim astronomers did maintain and advance astronomical science while Europe lost that knowledge. The telescope Azim uses is based on actual medieval Islamic optical instruments that predated European telescopes by centuries. Here's the collaboration that made it educational. Freeman brought in Dr. Salim al-Hassani, a historian of Islamic science, as an unpaid consultant to ensure accuracy. Al-Hassani spent 3 days on set rewriting Azim's dialogue to include real historical details. The production built a replica of an 11th century Islamic astronomical instrument based on museum specifications. But here's the impact nobody anticipated. After the film's release, universities reported increased enrollment in courses on Islamic contributions to science. The scene sparked genuine interest in a historical topic most audiences knew nothing about. Multiple educational institutions contacted Morgan Freeman asking permission to use the scene in classrooms. Warner Brothers eventually created an educational edit of the sequence for schools. Here's the legacy. A 2-minute scene in an action film became one of the most effective public education tools about Islamic scientific achievement in Western popular culture. Number 4. The film's witch character was added after test. Audiences said they needed a female villain. Here's the last-minute addition that required major reshoots. The witch Mortiana, played by Geraldine McEwen, didn't exist in the original script and wasn't filmed during principal photography. Warner Brothers added her during post-production. After test screenings revealed, audiences felt the film needed a female antagonist to balance the male-dominated cast. Here's the rush development. The studio hired emergency screenwriters to create a witch character and integrate her into existing footage. They had 2 weeks to write her scenes and figure out how to make it appear she'd been in the movie all along. Actress Geraldine McEwen was cast 4 days before filming began because she was available immediately and could memorize dialogue quickly. But here's the technical nightmare. The production had already wrapped and the sets were destroyed. Mortiana's scenes had to be filmed on reconstructed partial sets that matched existing footage. Editors had to seamlessly insert her into scenes where she hadn't existed, requiring expensive digital compositing. Here's the cost of this addition. Building partial sets and filming Mortiana's scenes cost $1.3 million. Digital effects to insert her into existing scenes cost another $800,000. The total budget addition was $2.1 million for a character that wasn't in the original plan. But here's the result. Despite being a last-minute addition, Mortiana became one of the film's most memorable characters. Her creepy prophecies and death scene are frequently cited by fans. The emergency. Addition that horrified the production team ended up significantly improving the film according to audience reactions. Number 3. Kevin Costner and Kevin Reynolds haven't spoken since the film's release. Here's the friendship that the film destroyed. Kevin Costner and Kevin Reynolds had been close friends since film school, with Costner giving Reynolds his directing break on Fandango in 1985. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves ended their relationship so completely that they haven't spoken a word to each other in over 30 years. Here's how bad the feud became. During post-production, Costner and Reynolds communicated only through intermediaries. They refused to be in the same room together. Warner Brothers had to schedule separate editing sessions and conduct separate test screenings. When the film premiered, they walked different red carpets and attended different after-parties. Here's the specific betrayal that ended everything. Reynolds discovered that Costner had been meeting secretly with Warner Brothers executives to request additional edits without the director's knowledge. Costner had asked the studio to reduce Reynolds' screen credit and diminish his creative input. Reynolds considered this unforgivable betrayal by someone he'd considered his closest friend. But here's Costner's side of the conflict. He believed Reynolds was destroying the film with his 3-hour cut and making poor creative choices that would hurt both their careers. Costner felt justified in protecting the project, even if it meant going behind Reynolds' back. Here's the permanent damage. When Warner Brothers released the director's cut on DVD, Reynolds recorded a commentary track specifically criticizing Costner's performance and creative demands. Costner responded by stating in interviews that Reynolds was a talented director who lost perspective. Multiple mutual friends have attempted to mediate. Both refuse reconciliation. A film that was supposed to celebrate their friendship instead destroyed it permanently. Number 2. The final battle was reshot 4 times. Because test audiences found it confusing. What if the finale that audiences saw was the 5th attempt? The final battle between Robin and the sheriff went through 4 complete reshoots because test audiences consistently reported being confused about what was happening and who was winning. Warner Brothers spent over $3 million trying to get the ending right. Here's the original version. Director Kevin Reynolds filmed an elaborate battle with Robin and the sheriff, fighting through multiple castle rooms while the building burned around them. Test audiences found it spatially confusing and couldn't follow the action. Here's version 2. Editors simplified the sequence, removing 3 rooms and making the geography clearer. Audiences complained it felt too short and anticlimactic. Version 3 added more combat choreography and extended the fight by 4 minutes. Audiences said it was too long and repetitive. Version 4 changed the setting to the castle tower to make victory more visual with a potential fall. Here's where it got expensive. Each reshoot required rebuilding sets that had been destroyed, bringing back the entire cast and stunt crew, and reshooting surrounding scenes for continuity. By the 4th reshoot, Warner Brothers executives were furious about the costs and demanded Reynolds solve the problem. Here's the 5th version that finally worked. Reynolds combined elements from all 4 previous versions, creating a battle that moved through spaces clearly, had appropriate length, and ended with the sheriff's dramatic death from being skewered by Robin and then falling. This version tested well enough for release. The finale that took 5 attempts to get right cost more than many films' entire budgets. Number 1, the film lost money, despite earning nearly $400 million worldwide. Here's the ultimate secret that proves Hollywood accounting is insane. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves earned $390 million in worldwide box office revenue, making it the 2nd highest grossing film of 1991. Yet Warner Brothers claimed the film lost money and refused to pay profit participation to cast and crew members who had deals for back-end payments. Here's the financial breakdown that explains Hollywood's creative accounting. The film's production budget officially was $48 million, but actual costs including marketing, distribution, and interest on loans totaled over $170 million. Warner Brothers charged the production overhead fees of $32 million for using their own facilities and staff. They charged distribution fees of $93 million for releasing their own film. By the time accounting added every possible fee, the film's total cost on paper was $397 million. Here's the math that made it unprofitable. Box office revenue of $390 million minus expenses of $397 million equals a $7 million loss, at least according to Warner Bros.' accountants. Multiple cast members sued the studio for fraud, arguing the overhead and distribution fees were fictional charges designed to avoid paying profit participation. Here's the settlement that exposed the scam. Warner Bros. Settled multiple lawsuits for undisclosed amounts and agreed to cap certain fees on future productions. Independent auditors estimated the film actually generated over $150 million in real profit. But Hollywood accounting turned a massive hit into a paper loss to avoid paying the people who made it successful. The 2nd biggest film of 1991 officially lost money, proving that box office success means nothing in Hollywood accounting.